Okay, there we go. Well, welcome everybody. I guess people are still joining on, but why don't we get started? I'm Bill Leddy, the Vice President of Climate Action at AIA California, and I'm the chair of the Committee on the Environment. And I welcome all of you for this discussion about advocacy tips and tricks. So this is the second of our COAT statewide roundtables, and these roundtables were developed from the outreach we did to the local COAT committees at the chapter level to discover what resources and information you need to help grow your local COAT efforts successfully. Roundtable topics were developed with your feedback to provide you with updates and helpful information on a quarterly basis. So today, as I mentioned, we'll be discussing state level advocacy. Here's our program agenda, and I want to talk a little bit about just managing, little housework, managing questions. Click on the chat button located on the black menu bar in the Zoom. I'm sure you're all pretty familiar with the drill by now. And then type in any question you might have. Raise your hand by clicking participants, the three dots next to the unmute me, and then raise your hand. So we look forward to hopefully a robust conversation. With that, I'm going to there's a lot to cover today, and I'm just gonna, and we would like to have a good time for Q&A and discussion and so forth. So I'm just gonna do a quick summary of what we're up to at AIA California COAT and at what AIA California Climate Action is doing. First on the list is mandatory continuing education, and Mark Christian is going to go into this in a little more detail, but this is essentially our initiative to try to convince the state to require, in addition to the current five mandatory continuing ed credits for ADA, to require another 5 credits for net zero carbon design. Just because we feel we need to ramp up the education around that area among all California architects very quickly. So Mark can get into the details on that. The communications subcommittee, we're working on design awards using the Common App as part of the submission package, and the technical reviewers have successfully integrated that into the jury's conversations, decision making. Lots of great work on that. Also, the communications committee, subcommittee, is working on what you can do now pieces of a series of 1- and 2-page memos, sort of focusing on so far on EUI, why the 2030 commitment is important, and energy modeling and other topics that'll be, we hope, relevant to everyone's practice. And then, of course, at the same time, we're developing more social media toolkits on specific topics. Education committee is working really hard on their energy modeling education program and developing AIA 2030 commitment series. And they've also been at the forefront of the mandatory continuing ed effort. And then the advocacy committee is, of course, being very successful pursuing local REACH codes on electrification around the state, with several jurisdictions already approving them, and many more kind of in line to vote. So that's very exciting. And at the same time, we're compiling a list of all electric buildings, both reuse and new buildings that are case studies that can support the local REACH code efforts. So you'll hear more about advocacy, of course, from Mike Malinowski later in this presentation as well. So with that, let me make some introductions, and then we're off to the races here. So Mark Christian, Honorable AIA California, is the Director of Government Relations for AIA California, a position he's held since 1999. In this position, Mark is responsible for monitoring the California State Legislature, identifying bills of interest to the profession, developing and implementing strategies for the positive outcome of legislation of interest to the profession, and representing the profession before the legislature. Prior to joining the AIA California, Mark worked for the State Assembly for 9 years in several capacities, including as the policy consultant on several environmental laws. And I can just add that Mark has been absolutely essential to code and to our efforts moving forward with some of the advocacy efforts that we're doing. So he's a really huge asset we have at AIA California. The second speaker is Mike Malinowski, FAIA, and he's a principal of applied architecture, Sacramento, California. Mike has provided adaptive historic reuse, urban infill housing of all types, and urban revitalization design services for over 40 years. He is currently serving AIA California as a part-time consultant with a focus on the California regulatory and code environment. Mike's AIA service includes 2016 President of AIA California, AIA Code and Standards Committee from 2015 to 2017. He was on the AIA board from 2012 to 2014. He is currently on the ICC Existing Building Code Committee and the AIA National Center for Leadership, and working with AIA National on Permit Streamlining Toolkit. He's also founder and president of nonprofit Streamline Institute. Mike has researched and consulted on high performance permitting and presented on best practices nationally, and he led development of the Pass Permit Streamlining Program currently used by 18 jurisdictions, which has yielded up to 70% savings on both sides of the counter. So, and I also would add with Mike, he has been tireless in advocating for the Zero Code for California and other advocacy initiatives, and moving all that through a very challenging process, in which you'll hear more about as he gets into it. So with that, I'd like to introduce Mark and have Mark take it away.
Thank you, Bill, and good afternoon, everyone. I'm going to try to be relatively quick. Michael is going to talk about a lot of substantive issues that will take more time. I'm just going to focus on the process of advocacy and what advocacy is. In around 1981, AIA California relocated from San Francisco to Sacramento. And this was done only for one reason. Next slide, please. That's because this is where the state capital is. This is where decisions are made that can affect the practice of architecture. The leaders of AIA California back in 1981 decided that advocacy needed to be a primary focus of AIA California. And in order for them to do that, they had to have a full-time presence in Sacramento and engage on a daily basis the various entities in Sacramento that can impact the profession of architecture, whether it is working with the California Energy Commission, the California Architects Board, the California Building Standards Commission, or the legislature. The decision was made that we needed to be here to have that daily presence. Next slide, please. So the California legislature does take up a lot of our time. They are the ones who, introduce legislation that amends state law, laws that can have an impact on the profession or those things that are important to the profession. and we need to be here to engage. I'm a registered lobbyist, and so I'll go over to the legislature and testify on bills, meet with legislators, meet with legislative staff to try to influence in a positive way proposed legislation. Next slide. Why is AIA California concerned about state government, about the legislature? You exist in California because state law says you exist as an architect. State law has the Architects Practice Act. State law says what you can do, what steps you have to take to become an architect. Once you are an architect, what you can do, what others can't do, what others who are non-licensed can do. The very profession of architecture is established in state law. Next slide, please. So, and if anyone's ever curious about the legislative process, and if you've never seen Schoolhouse Rock, I'm Just a Bill, watch that. It does a very good job, actually, of talking about the legislative process. So we get involved in legislation. We sponsor legislation where we'll come up with an idea and we'll go to a legislator and say, hey, this is a wonderful idea. We think this bill will make California better, or it's needed, and we try to get that introduced. We will react to bills that others have introduced. We will oppose it, we will support it, we will seek to have an amendment. For example, several years ago, there was legislation, AB 2800, that creates the State Infrastructure Climate Commission to make recommendations on how state infrastructure should be resilient to the changing climate. And looking at the bill, sponsored by the Union of Concerned Scientists, and looking at the bill, we see that this commission has state scientists, state engineers, and other folks, but there was no architect on it. So we talked to the author's office, we talked to the Union of Concerned Scientists, and we said, your definition of infrastructure includes buildings. Buildings are designed by architects. If you want this report to have value as it relates to buildings, you have to have an architect on this commission. They agreed, and so the bill was amended, and an architect was added to that commission. It ended up being Chet Whittam, the state architect, and they published their report, and there's legislation this year to extend the life of the commission, and we'll try to get another architect appointed to it, of course. So we will react like that. On sponsored legislation, Bill mentioned briefly mandatory continuing education. At our July Board of Directors meeting, our Board of Directors overwhelmingly voted to support changing the law to require architects to take 5 hours of continuing education on decarbonization design, zero net carbon design as a condition of licensure. So we will seek legislation next year to add that requirement on licensure. And Bill can certainly get into more information on that during the Q&A portion of this meeting. So we are in the process of developing the materials behind that. And we are waiting until after the election so we know who will be in the legislature next year and where these legislators will be appointed, to what policy committees they'll be appointed. And once we know that, in January, we will ask legislators to author this bill. So we're in the process of doing that. Under Scott Shell's leadership, we are also involved in working with the local chapters. We are encouraging local jurisdictions to adopt local reach codes. We're doing this by letter, going on the record, and encouraging local chapters to become more engaged at the grassroots level. So very, very briefly, this is why we have advocacy here, the actions of the state legislature, the actions of the executive administrative branches, again, Building Standards Commission, Energy Commission, the California Architects Board, the list is much longer than that, can have a very large impact on the profession of architecture. We have to be there to engage in it on a daily basis. So as a staff person, I don't set policy. all of our policy is set by your colleagues who are on our board of directors. They're the ones that decide what we do and when we do it. My job is to implement the policy that the board of directors has adopted. So for sponsored legislation, generally between now and the November board meeting is when we will adopt our proactive agenda for the following year. We did the continuing education one a little bit early. Usually it's November board meeting where we will officially adopt the policy when the board approves it. At that point, we start working with the legislature. So the legislature generally meets from January through the end of August or the middle of September, depending on the year. And the bills are introduced by the end of the third week of February. And at that point, somewhere between 2,000, 2,500 bills are introduced every year by the third week of February. We look at, in one way or another, every single one of those bills and try to identify the bills that are relevant to the profession, and we run those by various committees comprising AI members and attorneys and insurers, depending on what the topic is, and present recommendations to the board of directors. And it's generally April through the end of August or the middle of September when the legislature is hearing and voting on the bills in a normal year. This is not a normal year. The legislature is a bit completely different this year because of COVID, but that's perhaps a topic for another conversation. One of the things that we do, if an issue is important and we think it is necessary for a positive outcome to be realized, is we will ask the membership to engage in grassroots lobbying. We will send an email to the membership, whether it is the whole membership or just targeted, constituents of a particular legislator, urging them to reach out to their legislator and asking them to vote yes or no on the bill, depending on what it is. Sometimes we will ask if it's necessary to have a member come up to Sacramento and testify at a hearing if we think a testimony from an architect, a member, would be more powerful than testimony from myself or our contract lobbyist, Mike Belote. I will not send emails to the membership unless I think it is absolutely necessary, unless I think it's going to make a difference. So if you ever do get an email from us saying, hey, this bill is up, please contact your legislator. Do know I'm not sending it to advertise that we exist here in Sacramento and that we do advocacy. I'm doing it because I think that is absolutely critical for a successful outcome to occur. For example, if a sales tax on services were to happen this year, or if it's going to happen next year, we will do grassroots activity on several different levels, not only asking you to send an email to your legislator, but we will try to arrange meetings between architects and the legislator in the district. It just depends what the issue is. So that is probably how we will ask you to get involved on state advocacy issues. If you have an idea through your experience in providing services to your clients, or however you have the idea that, this is not working, state law should be changed, contact me, reach out to me, or reach out to our VP. This year it's Rona Rothenberg. Let us know what the issue is. All of our ideas come from the members. We've had some pretty good ideas come from members that we've been able to turn into law. So we're not always successful because there are folks who oppose what we do at times, but do know that we are here for you. And if you have an idea, if you see something where you think this does not make sense, this is not right, there ought to be a law, reach out to me, let us know, and then we will run it up the flagpole, so to speak. And it may become, as that little bill right there on the steps of Capitol Hill, it may become legislation that we try to, improve the practice of architecture, try to improve California with the legislation. I'm going to pass this off to Michael now, who has some good examples of what he is working on in the regulatory arena that can impact not only society, California, but also the profession. Thank you. Michael?
Thanks, Mark. I'm going to share my screen, make sure that this works correctly. Can everybody see my my screen? Can you see it, Mark?
We're on your presentation mode side.
Okay, I picked the wrong screen. How about now? Can you see it now?
Perfect.
Okay, cool. So thanks for the introduction. As Mark said, I'm gonna give some more specific examples. Like most of you, I'm an architect in private practice. That's still my main gig. I work about 0.12 FTE for AIA California, and that's one of a number of things that I have going on. And I do want to start by just acknowledging that you're all busy people, I know, so carving time out of your day for a gathering like this is it's a big deal. Your time is precious. Even the lunch hours, time is precious. Many of you, like me, tend to work through your lunch hour because it's another hour that you could get something done and move the agenda forward. There is so much going on at AIA California. It's literally breathtaking. This year in particular, this focus on climate action and the number of initiatives that we have underway that are related to that. It's really just astounding. And the number of people who are working on it, the brain power, the A-team that's been assembled. I mean, it's quite exciting, really. And these COPE meetings, gatherings, these virtual gatherings, man, there's so much energy. There's so much interest. There's so much activity. So I could you know, start to talk about all this different stuff. But I know for many of you, especially when you get into some of this stuff, it's sort of like your eyes start to glaze over. So what I thought might be more interesting was just take one of these out of this menu, and then just kind of give you a case study example. Now, Mark's been at this, as he said, for 21 years. I've been in this role for, well, since July of 2019 in this part-time role, helping AIA California in the arena of codes and regulatory. And in fact, it was at the AIA board meeting in Berkeley. That was my very first day in this role. And there was a presentation by some nationally known top dogs in climate action, including Ed Mesria himself and one of the key California energy commissioners, Charles Eli, Larry Strain. Some people on this call were there. And the board the following day took the action to urge immediate implementation of the zero code as quickly as possible. That was, I don't remember the exact words of I wasn't there when the board took that action, but that was sort of my marching orders. So zero code as soon as possible. When you look at the landscape of code and regulatory issues and how they affect architects, you know, it's a really broad landscape, and all the different parts have different timelines. So the national codes, they're on a 3-year cycle. California codes are adopted typically 1 year after the national code. When our energy code is a 3.5-year cycle, roughly, they are right now in the process of hearings for the 2022 code. And I didn't realize this as a practicing architect a year ago, but there's actually a mid-cycle update in California. That takes 2 to 2.5 years. But what's strange about the mid-cycle update is that they are updating a code that is not yet in place. So, you know, it's sort of like, well, how do they know what needs to be fixed? Well, it's just based on the theory of the code, not necessarily of people reporting of how it works in law. Then we have regulations. You have rulemaking by state agencies. That's roughly a 1.5-year timeline. Then you have local code amendments. Those are limited in scope under state law. They can only do so many things. They can't actually push into whole new territory. They have to at least maintain what's been adopted at the state level. But those are quick, a half year to 1 year. And then new laws. Those can go into effect quite quickly. Many of you remember not that long ago, there was a new law passed on water conservation. It affected our work as architects, but it was not in the code, and that creates some confusion. And that's why there's a standing AIA policy against modifying codes via law changes. And it's because it's not integrated in the process. It takes everyone by surprise. It's not in the books. Trying to even figure out what the law says and how it relates to it. It's just, everybody gets blindsided. So you remember when that water conservation law went into place, every local building department across California, and there are a lot of them, hundreds, maybe thousands, had to put their own interpretation together. They were issuing bulletins, they're citing things on plan check, and there's still a lot of variation jurisdiction to jurisdiction. So here I am now with the zero code being endorsed by the board, and the board also decided what they were going to use as their primary strategy was to get the governor to push the zero code forward. So the board decided it was going to send a letter urging urgent action, and the discussions I heard was that there was going to be a sort of the let's move and descend on the Capitol, lobby in person, and make something happen. Well, the reality is the governor doesn't implement codes. And so as I started to look at what are the realistic paths that we could take to put the zero code into effect quickly, it is possible the governor could issue an executive order, and maybe our letter could influence that. If there was a meeting, that would even be better. There's the possibility of legislative action, and Bill Leddy actually led the charge on this to talk to legislators that were sympathetic to both architects and the urgency of climate action. And then there's possibility of actually trying to plug it into the code. We were in the middle of a mid-cycle update when the board took its action, and in doing the research, there's a whole clause in the state laws regarding the code update process, which is this whole elaborately scripted dance when you dive in, which I hadn't done prior to being in this position to actually look at the state laws regarding code change, but there's a whole series of processes that actually unfold. And emergency action is like a dash to the finish line. What it doesn't waive things, but what it does is it changes the order. So you actually you can put a code into effect and then go through this elaborate hearing process. You don't actually eliminate it, but it occurs after you put, and then there's a certain time frame that it has to happen. So we developed this as a 3-part strategy to push the zero code forward. And we were working on all 3 of these strategies at the same time. So one of the things, and I'm trying to work on all 3 of these, the third one was integrated in the code. So the question is, where would it fit in Title 24, which, as you know, is a bunch of different codes. It's not just one book. There's a whole bunch of different codes, and many people thought it should be in the Energy Code. Well, the Energy Code for California is unique. It is scripted by a particular set of laws. It has a very large infrastructure in place that develops that code over a very long period of time. You saw in that earlier slide, it is on its own time frame that's even longer than the typical code cycle. And when I looked at the actual zero code, the way the zero code is written, so there's this website that you see on your screen, which talks about the zero code, and it gives a bunch of narrative information. It has a calculator, and it has all these different documents. There are actually 2 versions of the zero code. There's the national zero code, and actually it turns out that Architecture 2030, working with AIA National, was successful in getting the zero code into the 2022 International Energy Conservation Code. And that was, it was really kind of like a Hail Mary pass caught in the finish, in the finish line, because the committee itself, the code committee, voted against adoption. But then the whole elaborate process that's used to develop national codes, there's sort of an overruled path that can happen by vote of the membership, and that's how the zero code ended up in the appendix. So, but the zero code for California is different than the national zero code. It uses the California code development system because we have our own energy code that's different than the national energy code. And so the zero code for California was written in conjunction with that. And these documents are pretty substantial. They're not like hundreds of pages, but when you think about how the code is written, The code as a philosophical concept tries to take a complex idea and put it into a paragraph, just a few words. So how those words are interpreted are important. There aren't many things in the code that are 10 pages long, and the code doesn't typically have a whole narrative. That's a separate document. So in the zero code, there's a separate technical support document, and there's 10 pages in the zero code for California that describe the zero code, what it's trying to accomplish, language that is not the kind of language that you would typically find if you pick the building code off your shelf. It doesn't give you the background. I mean, there's a lot of detail in there, but the words are carefully chosen so they can convey as much information in as few words as possible. So when you look at the code landscape, there is one unique code in California. CalGreen is the sort of the short phrase. It's not technically called CalGreen, but it was developed in California, and it's now part of the national code landscape. And the CalGreen is a little different than most codes, as it does have some sections that are narrative. It's a little looser, the way it references standards. It's kind of its own animal, and it's because it's a California developed animal. So the zero code is a reach code in a sense by its nature. It's about you really create this really high level of performance. So it seemed to me that CalGreen might be a place to fit it. I vetted that idea with a variety of people, including the chair of the Green Code Committee, Steve Winkle, our sort of go-to guy in California, and he's a national go-to guy in terms of code development, and got feedback, yeah, that makes sense. So then you look at, so there's this idea, okay, we're gonna look to somehow integrate the zero code for California into CalGreen. So here's the structure of CalGreen. So where in this landscape of chapters and appendices would the zero code likely fit? And I picked Appendix A5, non-residential voluntary measures, because the zero code for California is non-residential, because its nature is narrative. It's a voluntary measure, and that we did not think it could be implemented realistically without tremendous pushback as a mandate for every single project in the whole state of California right off the bat. We thought it should logically start as a reach code, and then you can work over time to get it more integrated in to the main code network. So that was the target place. And so the way you accomplish code change is you first create a petition. Now you'd think that a letter like this one that we crafted is the petition, but it is actually not the petition. That's just sort of background information. The petition is a state form that says you want to propose the code change. And if you actually looked at the code change itself, this is it. And again, like most codes, very few words are meant to accomplish a lot. The actual change to the green code is just what you see in red on your screen. So it's really a very small number of words. The fewer the words, in my experience sitting on the DS at the International Code hearings, the fewer the words, the more likely in some ways that a proposal is going to be successful, because people have to understand it. And every word, every phrase, every even punctuation can be the subject of debate. So we filed this code change position, and we cited a climate emergency. And it turned out at the time we filed the petition, there's this website that says that over 1,200 governments across the world have declared climate change an emergency. And the number since then has actually increased to 1,700. This is the website where they track how many government entities have declared a climate emergency. California has not, as of yet, declared a climate emergency. The city of Sacramento has, the city of Davis has, a lot of local jurisdictions have. But it turns out that a petition based on emergency is a little different. So we filed a petition. It's reviewed by the Building Standards Commission in October. So the mid-cycle update's still going on. Supposedly their hearings were going to go through December. So we're thinking, okay, October, November, December, maybe we can get this in the mid-cycle update. They accepted it. They reviewed it. They deemed it valid. We met with them at the earliest date they were available, which was November 5th. They told us that it's not enough for the AIA California to declare an emergency on the climate. The declaration has to be made by the governor or state agency, but they actually helped us out. They told us what state agency was in the best position based on their statutory framework to declare a climate emergency. They said, go to the Air Resources Board. They told us the person to contact. So Mark and I immediately jumped on that, and we set up a meeting. That was the earliest available date to meet with Cal EPA, and their building in Sacramento was in mid-November. So we met with them, and we made a pitch for the EPA to declare a climate emergency and thus allow us to get the zero code in as a mid-cycle update so we could get it effective by the middle of 2021. So here's how that three-path strategy worked out. Executive order, we wrote the letter, there were a lot of calls made, people who knew people, no response. Bill Leddy met with a number of legislative offices, with staff, with legislators. There were a lot of movements and a lot of discussion, but over a period of months, no real progress. And the code change, the Air Resources Board declined to make the emergency declaration. The State Building Standards Commission deemed that without that, we were too late to inject into the mid-cycle. So now what? Well, we don't just take the ball and go home with it. Architects don't do that. It'd be like someone telling you your building's not approved. You're going to go in and figure out why, and you're going to press ahead. So we developed some new strategies. And again, like many architects, I don't like to just have one strategy. I like to have a fallback position, especially, and I'm learning as this advocacy, you go into these situations and you got to be flexible. You got to really pay attention to the nuances, and you got to have a backup plan. And so now we have a two-path strategy. One is reach code coordination. And as you heard, this effort that's being led by Scott Schell has been incredibly successful. Of course, there were people working on this before AIA California got involved. And you know that there are 30 cities in California that are adopting local amendments. So we thought, could we modify the zero code to align with the reach codes that are already spreading across the landscape? So the zero code is written by Architecture 2030. One of our own Californians, Charles Eli, is the primary author, but that's an organization not based in California. But we know the people, we're trying to move this forward with them. So now we're reaching out to them saying, hey, you guys wrote a zero code for California. You wrote it 2 years ago. Things in California have changed a lot over the last 2 years. Is it possible to create a new version of the zero code for California that we could plug into this reach code landscape and thus sort of layer it into that? And one other advantage of that is it would create greater consistency, because what we have right now is 30 cities, over 30, adopting reach codes. Well, every one of those reach codes is different. So as an architect, how do you feel about the idea that you're going to be working in a landscape where every city is going to have its own version of a climate action plan that affects the design of your building? That starts to get pretty tough to keep track of. You could walk across the block and have a different code that you have to meet. So a lack of uniformity is not a good thing. The more consistency, the better. If we could get the zero code to be a proxy for many of those reach codes, that would help create a greater level of consistency. This is starting to become very exciting. Architecture 2030 said, yeah, we're willing to take a fresh look at that. And we've been working with them for several months. We're on our, I don't know, third, fourth, fifth draft. We just had a meeting yesterday. I think we're that close. We're within weeks of there being a new zero code for California rolled out that will align almost perfectly with the mainstream of California reach code. So we made incredible progress. And our petition, even though it didn't get into the mid-cycle, still a valid code change petition. So we're in the pipeline for a change to the Cal Green that will go into effect as part of the 2022 code cycle, January 1st, 2023. So that petition still is active, still moving forward. Those hearings are going to start in a month and a half or so. They have to wrap up the mid-cycle update, which they're doing the last of that in the next few weeks. In fact, tall wood is actually up for the final committee vote. Let's see, is that tomorrow? And it's either going to be tomorrow or the next day. So that's part of the mid-cycle update, which is pretty amazing because normally the mid-cycle update is minor, often editorial minor corrections. That tall wood change is a really dramatic change. It's going to allow the use of wood as the structural system for buildings up to 18 stories. That is on the threshold of being at its final approval in the next couple of days. And at this point, it doesn't appear there's any pushback that hasn't already been addressed. So it's kind of in the last sign on the dotted line stage. So in the broad landscape of climate action via code change, which is actually something AI nationally has endorsed. They issued a report called the Blue Ribbon Committee review of how important codes can be in addressing climate action. So AIA California actually has two code changes. One is to put the zero code, a new zero code that is not yet even on the website. So we're going to be asking that new zero code to be plugged into CalGreen using those few sentences that I showed you in that earlier screen. That will activate the zero code for use in California so that cities can easily adopt it. We have another code change position. When I found out the paths, and even though I'm on a national ICC code committee, I have not personally initiated a code change as a personal effort before this. And once I saw, hey, this isn't so hard, I thought we should actually expand the California existing building code because we have only adopted one of the three methods you can use to show code compliance for an existing building here in California. We have a crippled version of the existing building code that's in use nationally. Now, this is a code that used to be an appendix in the main code. Many of you remember there was an appendix existing buildings, and at its height, that appendix had a whole set of options, including a point system you could use to show compliance. We don't have access to that anymore in California. It was taken away when they rolled out the existing building code as a separate code. California only adopted a handful of chapters, and it limits us as architects to only using the prescriptive measures. So if you don't have access to the state historic building code, you have access to only a tiny part of the whole framework of the existing building code. So we also launched a code change petition so that California would have access to the full three compliance methods. So right now we have prescriptive. This would give us access to both the performance method for code compliance and the work area method, both of which can be extremely valuable to prevent those situations where sort of the code change, the code process for an existing building triggers unsolvable problems, like when you're required to bring in a full building up to current code. I mean, that's going to make most projects infeasible. So we actually now are in this landscape with active code change processes. And the landscape for how you manage code change in California has a lot of similarities with the code change process nationally. It is a scripted, very detailed, step-by-step process that involves many, many hearings and discussions and touches on all the potential stakeholders that have an interest, including people who own buildings, people who build buildings, trade associations, manufacturers, code officials. All those people are supposed to be involved in the code development process. And when you look at the hearings at the national level and you see the landscape of all these experts, many of whom devote their full career, full time, just to the code development process, it can get really in the weeds really quickly. So in order to be successful with our code change, we have to do some advocacy. We have to lay the groundwork. We have to actually contact organizations and individuals who are going to write letters of support, testify at the hearings, and we're in the process of building that. So here are a few personal observations. Again, I thought to keep this kind of conversational, and I'm kind of using this as a case study, and here are some things that I found. And I've met with a lot of state agencies in the last year on behalf of AIA California, and some of them have actually been literal in explaining to me, and often with Mark, that they are by nature reactive. They implement laws that are passed by the legislator. They're not necessarily out there looking for issues to address. They're implementing and they are reacting. Many of these agencies, like take the Building Standards Agency, for example, its executive director, deputy director, and key staff people are architects, and actually they're AIA California members. You can bet that makes a huge difference in the sort of nuanced approach to code development in the state of California. Interestingly, of those three, two have already, I believe, announced their trajectory for retirement. The likelihood that we are going to get more architects to step in that role, I hope, is pretty high. And in fact, of those three, two of them I know from Sacramento. They were architects in private practice that sort of decided that this would be another path for them to use their talents. So there are great opportunities. There are opportunities for AIA California members to engage in the code development process. And in fact, everyone on this call hopefully is going to hear about our code change proposals in the next month or so, because we're going to need letters and people who are willing to testify. And finally, this whole reach code thing is just amazing that's happening in California. When you think about over 30 cities adopting code requirements that basically mandate things like electrification or not being able to burn fossil fuels on site, that really is unprecedented. And it's turning out that AIA California members are hugely influential in making these changes happen, which influence not just other cities, but it actually influences the world. In fact, Ed Masria has said many times that the world tends to look to California as being the cutting edge, the bleeding edge when it comes to climate action. What are we doing? Ed's told stories about he's in China, and they say, well, what's California doing with a particular issue? So what we do does make a difference, not just for our state, because our state could be as green as can be, and the world is not necessarily going to be shifted because climate change is a world problem, but we are influential beyond just who we are. When you look at the number of state agencies that touch on buildings, it's a long list. Every one of these state agencies could benefit from more engagement by the architectural profession. In this time of COVID and the economic damage that it may develop throughout our industry, maybe it's going to create some opportunities for some architects to consider shifting over to work in the government side of the equation. There are also the advisory committees that work under the California Building Standards Commission. Many of these are populated or led by architects and AIA California members, and a lot of opportunities there. There are also code officials and others involved, but these are all opportunities. When I look ahead for this climate action via code change, we are working on rules that are going to go into effect in 2023. That's pretty far down the road. And when you think about how quickly things are changing, the knowledge that we have, there's a lot of opportunity. We have 2 code changes proposals. Are there other things that could be happening? A lot of other things could be happening. I believe we need consistency in the reach code environment. I've actually done an outreach letter to the decarbonization listserv, and actually just got a response yesterday from the Natural Resource Defense Council saying that they're interested in how they can influence codes toward climate action. And I believe there will be interest from other organizations. So we need architects who, you know, have an interest in helping look at that. And then you have to look at what will the landscape about carbon be in 2023. And I'm sure right now many people feel that our code environment is not ready to talk about embodied carbon or carbon capture or even going beyond zero when you talk about carbon positive. But what about in 2023? If we don't create the framework for that now, we're going to be behind the curve. So I think that there's the potential that the green code could have some infrastructure put into place. So as these future issues get more grounded and more ready to be adopted in day-to-day work, we'll have a place for them to go. So anyone on this call or anyone you might know that's interested in these emerging issues in Cal Green, if you let me know, because I already have some interest from the organizations that are sort of at the forefront of this REACH code environment, and we can help in our own way to move this agenda forward. And with that, oh, and I do get going, I apologize. And once I get rolling, you know, I do catch my breaths now and then, but if anybody was trying to say anything, it's pretty hard to break in. So with that, I'm gonna mute my mic and turn it back over to my compatriots and all this brain power that we've got on this call here today. It's just breathtaking, really. Thanks.
Thanks, Mike. That's a lot of great information to absorb. I don't see any questions on the chat. Any hands raised? Hillary, do we have any? Oh, we have maybe. Nope. Everyone's speechless because you covered so much ground. I'll just add one observation, which I think maybe for this group is self-evident. You know, for most of my career anyway, you know, we architects, and myself included, sort of took a reactive approach to the building code, and half the time just, you know, grumbled about it, kind of getting in the way of real architecture. And I think what I and many of us have realized is that we actually, to be fully kind of grounded citizen architects, we need to be fully engaged in advocacy to help make you know, the built environment better and better. And so this is I think kind of a really important you know, aspect of our profession that's getting more important all the time. And you know, I think what we're really here to do is talk about how, you know, we can all in our own way, in our own worlds, in our own contexts, you know, be as effective as we possibly can. So anybody have any questions or comments? There's one. Let's see, thanks for, Alice Sung says, thanks for the incredible presentation of the process and the current work. Are there things we can do to shift investments by programs from the state and other sources toward zero carbon, and specifically into public K-12 school districts? Anyone want to take that one? Any of the my esteemed colleagues here want to take that one? I think that. Go ahead.
Mark's thoughts on that, but I do know that Ida Clare, who is the state architect and an AIA California member and a licensed architect based here in Sacramento. I know she has a very keen interest in working with AIA California and also a keen interest in climate action. And I think that there's sort of a runway that's open. One of the challenges that we face, though, we as COAT and as an organization, AIA California, we have so many balls in the air right now. It's just, it's really just amazing. And we're actually making great progress. But what we need are people who have a sort of a narrow focused interest in a small area, who are actually willing to say, okay, I will spearhead this new agenda, and then take the ball and run with it, and we can support that. So that would be my thought on something like that.
Okay.
Mark?
Thank you. Anybody else have any thoughts on the funding question or the specifically relative to the K-12 public schools? No.
I can add something. Maybe for state buildings. I think we were all optimistic that Governor Newsom would, as he is, you know, tends to be, would be very forward-thinking and aggressive in pursuing raising the bar on the design and construction and operation of buildings. But I think the COVID-19 may have changed the priorities, and, you know, they may have a bandwidth issue. But we're hopeful that once this settles down, that we may be able to work with his administration to look at, okay, what can we do with state buildings? There have been several executive orders over the year by, I believe, starting with Gray Davis and Governor Schwarzenegger and Governor Brown about the performance of state buildings. And there might be an opportunity for Governor Newsom, as the lead owner of state buildings, to implement requirements, zero net carbon requirements for state buildings. Certainly something we'll pursue. There are other folks involved in similar efforts that Scott Shell has done a fantastic job in linking us with, and Bill Leddy as well. And maybe we get those folks as an organization, as a coalition, and ask the state to set an example. On school buildings, I would have to look into that a little bit more. Sorry, because those are owned by school districts. And with that, the governor does not have any control over that. I don't think DSA has the control over that. We may have to look at other ways to achieve that. But I'm sorry, I have not put much thought into that one up to this point.
One thing I'll just add on that is that I think many of us feel that we're involved, as I think Mike kind of alluded to this a little bit as well. We're involved in kind of specific actions that we're trying to take relative to reducing carbon in the built environment, but we're also, I think, part of a larger effort that you can see starting to sweep around the nation, which is increasingly heightened awareness about the climate emergency and about the importance of dealing with this, like right now. We can't wait. So I do think that there's while we may be frustrated at times that it's not moving quickly enough, I do think that there's a really strong momentum that's being gained, and we're racing, I feel, at this point toward a tipping point. And I think one of the other questions here, which I think is great that maybe Scott Shell can answer, is that whether there's a list of cities with reach codes and provide the related information. So Scott, take that one away.
I just didn't hear the last part of the question. Can you repeat that?
It says, are there, well, I think Mike put that up as a link of lists, and I think somebody else was asking for the existing buildings. I'm losing track of all the questions. They're all coming in now. Do you want to talk a little bit about that, Scott? I think that's really important because it drills back down to the local level and how important local advocacy is.
Yeah, I'd be happy to. And thanks, Michael, for that excellent overview. I think there's a couple ways that people on this call could help immediately. One is if any of your local chapters would like to kind of endorse an electric reach code for your geography, that would be fantastic. Mark Christian has been helping to facilitate that with some local chapters. Like we just wrote a joint letter with AIA California and AIA San Francisco, and we could do that for other chapters. We like to be coordinated with the local chapters. The other thing that's been super effective is we need local architects and designers to advocate rather than having somebody from out of town come in. We can provide lots of technical support and background and talking points, but Paul Poirier just spoke at the climate committee in Santa Barbara and is organizing several cities there to pursue electric reach codes. And it's so much more effective because he knows everybody, they trust him, he can point at his buildings, and so if anybody else wants to get involved, we're especially trying to expand outside the Bay Area where there's been a really strong movement. So if you live or work in Central or Southern California or other places, let us know. One of our most effective tools has been showing examples of all electric projects, either in design or construction, because people want to see one in their own neighborhood. They don't want to see one, if you're in San Francisco, you don't want to see one in LA, and if you're in LA, you don't want to see one in San Francisco. So if you have an all-electric building, I have a slide deck and I'll put it on there and I'll put your name, your firm name and the mechanical engineer and so forth on it. And then when we're advocating with cities, they can pick out their local projects. So if you can help or would like to help with any of those things, please let me know. We're trying to build up our team here.
Thanks, Scott. Henry, I saw you put through a few questions into the chat. Do you want to express those in words?
Sure. I just asked the question, is it time to consider advocating for making all of Title 24 apply to existing buildings? So if you, for example, I just remodeled the Berkeley Hillel building at UC Berkeley. It was an $8 million project. There were no requirements for Title 24 except for lighting. But what if beyond a certain trigger amount you spend on a building, you have to make the upgrades to make the operating energy comply with Title 24? Seems like we are to the point where we might want to advocate for something like that, though I'm sure we'd receive some pushback for something like that as well. But a lot of buildings are being left out of the energy upgrade path, and maybe we can up the requirements for existing buildings.
And as we all know, the most sustainable building is the one that's already built. So harvesting the embodied carbon and paving the way for providing incentives and making that happen more frequently is absolutely critical. So that's yet another focus of advocacy that we need to keep pushing forward on. I think Ismar Enriquez from AIA CA had a question. Do you want to just say that out loud, Enrique? Ismar, are you still there?
Still here. Thanks, Bill. No, my question was kind of getting support. I think Mike responded to it, but just to put it in the general to the general group here, I find a lot of help looking at the framework for design excellence, a lot of resources, a lot of case studies, just like Scott Shell and has a slide deck when he's trying to champion. Is there something that we can all work together, or AIA California can support as far as a toolkit that we can use in different jurisdictions? Berkeley is way ahead of its time, right? SLO is following, which I'm kind of surprised because I find it as more of a conservative community. But you know, LA is a lot different than San Diego and the Inland Empire. And so if we had maybe a toolkit that can help us sort of advocate, that would be helpful. And I wonder if that is something AIA California would support, would start to work on, or would like us to help and achieve some kind of toolkit so we can advocate for reach codes, electrification, decarbonization.
Yeah, Ismail, this is Scott. I think that's a great question and suggestion. I believe I saw that Mike Malinowski posted the Building Decarb Compass website, and they're kind of doing exactly that. And it's sort of a crowdsourced website. They got a grant from the Air Resources Board to do that, and so they're getting paid to do it. And we can all contribute documents, and the AIA California has contributed a bunch of documents to it. So it's a great resource. If you have more things you want to add, let us know. We are working pretty closely with that team. And
yeah, you know Simone very well, and Bill does too. And in our group, we have a lot of people that are very interested, but they just don't know how, right? There are very few people like you and us that can get a little behind and work with Will and advocacy groups. But there's a lot of more people that are willing to help that don't really have the blueprint to start to dig into that.
Well, that's exactly where I was, you know, a year or two ago when Berkeley started their code, and I just showed up when they asked me to, and I gradually learned how to do it. And there's a team of people here ready and willing to assist, and we need people that are willing to put in the time and energy, and you sound like you're willing to do that. So we're going to recruit you onto our team.
Sure. No problem.
To Ismar's point, that happens to be one of our action items. We have a series of one-pagers that are coming out, and one of them is intended to be about local advocacy and how you yourself can take part, what the steps are. How do you find out where a meeting is, or how to frame the 2 minutes that you have to speak when you're at that meeting? So that is one of our goals for AIA California Code.
That's great to hear, Sharon and Scott, and thank you for bringing up that point, Ismar. This is Alice. I just wanted to actually throw out to the group here. What if we also took another approach and looked also first to partner with those other organizations like Building Decarbonization Coalition and others that already are, midstream into this advocacy for REACH codes and for other zero carbon initiatives like Architecture 2030, Sierra Club, NRDC, EDF, right? All of these organizations. There actually is another organization I'm involved with called the Climate Reality Project, right? It's Al Gore's team of folks. They actually were very successful in teaming together with an initiative of Sierra Club called Climate Parents. And together, those two organizations with the students, the community itself, in convincing LAUSD, the largest school district, the second largest in the country, and the largest in our state with over 1,000 schools, and LA Community College District to adopt 100% clean energy policies. So they are already on their way to decarbonizing and looking to zero carbon and the provision of 100% renewables. They've set goals similar to San Francisco Unified. That was one of the leaders in carbon neutrality after UC System set their goals. So I see that there could be great power in taking some time to reach out to partners that strategically could present more powerful faces to the local governments and to our whole cause if we bring them into the fold. And there actually are talking point pieces that actually help us as local advocates. That's part of what Climate Reality does, is train you how to be an advocate. So, and I strongly recommend anyone who wants to take the training, it's free, it's online now. Go ahead and sign up. I think there's one coming up in a couple of weeks. I don't know if they've closed applications, but highly recommend it. But I'm going to ask them if I can pass on those. There's already 4 pages of how to work with local advocacy. And I'm going to ask if I could share that. I would love to share it with you. We can take that as a start, but I suggest we reach out to Climate Reality, Sierra Club, NRDC, some of these other organizations that are, there's no sense in recreating the wheel, and there's more power in collaboration than in individual, diverse little, piecemeal efforts. What do you think?
So Alice, you hit the nail on the head, and we've been working really hard to do that. We've had a number of calls with most of the folks that you mentioned, not the Climate Reality Project. I don't know those folks, but we've had a series of calls with them and with Architecture 2030. And then I have every 2 weeks, I have a call with NRDC, the Sierra Club, and Building Decarb Coalition to kind of compare notes. One of the things that we really bring is we bring people all over the state, and we have local architects and practitioners on the ground. That's a very powerful thing. These nonprofit environmental organizations are very happy to have our technical expertise and sort of our building professional approach as opposed to just an environmental organization. So we kind of want to remain distinct a little bit. We want to remain as building professionals, but they have great insight into what's coming up where, and they can get their Sierra Club can get their members out as well, and so forth. That's a great point that you make.
So how do I plug in to that group, Scott?
I think the best way to plug in would be on our advocacy committee, our AIA CA California Advocacy Committee.
Okay.
And I think you're already on the decarb listserv.
Yeah. So you're talking about this committee, a subcommittee, which is what I asked. How do I?
We have.
So cool. Invite me.
Okay. You're on.
You're invited.
You're on.
Yeah. Thank you.
Anybody else? Anybody have specific issues in their locality or struggles of kind of pushing things through, or issues around struggling with electrification, reach codes, or anything of that sort?
Hey, Bill, I see a question from Jen Dunbar about the existing building code, and that's a topic I'm very passionate about. And maybe I didn't make it clear,
Go for it.
but the reason that the existing building code is so important for climate action is what was mentioned earlier, that the greenest building is one that already exists. Anything we can do to encourage and facilitate and support architects in repurposing buildings rather than tearing them down is going to move the climate change agenda forward. And in fact, some would say that that embodied carbon is more important to near-term action than operational carbon considerations, because the operational benefits unfold over decades. Those short-term benefits, those happen right early in the project. And that's the driver behind our code change proposal. This code change proposal that I described sounds pretty simple: to expand the international existing building codes 3 compliance methods and bring those to California. But it's going to be really hard. And it turns out that there was already an effort to try and do this a couple years ago, we found out, that was led by HCD. And they were halfway into that, and the whole thing just collapsed because of some pushback that came during the hearing process that was driven by a particular structural engineering concern about a particular clause. So rather than parcel out that one section, the whole effort just fell apart, and then it sat on the shelf for several years. So we want to approach this smart. So what we're trying to do in the next month, before the code change hearings even start, is get supporters lined up. So Mark already has in his hands a letter that is sort of the template letter that is meant to go out to organizations saying, please support our effort to expand the California existing building code. And everyone on this call could help by identifying organizations that are likely candidates to support us. We're obviously going to send it to the Building Decarbonization Coalition, the National Resource, but there are so many others, the Straw Bale Association, the California Association of Building Energy Consultants. I was at one of those conferences, and I think I collected several dozen, and there are new organizations popping up all the time, like Alice mentioned, one that's doing great work. Every one of those voices is going to help us. But we also need to send letters to organizations that we think might be opponents. And the reason we want to do that early is we want to find out what their pushbacks are going to be. So we're going to send letters to BOMA, the BIA, the maybe the gas industry, I don't know, everybody who might say, hey, we're gonna try and trip this up. And the idea is to find out early in the game who these players are, what their arguments are going to be, so we can start to build our talking points. Getting these letters out is really important. I have asked for support from AIA staff because it's a lot of work to send out. You know, I'm hoping we're going to send out 50 letters, because they really need to be sent to a person, not just to a name of an organization, or especially via email, because they're not going to have any impact. So anybody on this call that could help with that effort, I'd appreciate it if you would let me or Mark or Scott know, because maybe you could take on, you know, a half dozen organizations. The work of creating the letter and the message is done. It's a matter now of getting these out, and I don't want to wait until we're in the middle of the hearing process, because in some ways then we're being reactive, then we're just responding. I want to know in advance what the lay of the land looks like. Sorry for going on in such length on that, but obviously it's a topic I'm quite excited about.
Thanks, Mike. Bring your passion on. We love it. Anybody else have a question or a comment? Got 15 minutes to go. I'm not opposed to ending early so some of us can grab lunch, but if we want to keep going, let's keep going. Any other questions or thoughts? Southern California, Paul, do you want to just speak up on this? Paul Poirier?
Yeah, so I just wanted to say that, you know, all of the efforts to adopt the zero code get it in there as a reach code makes it easy for the cities to take the jump to adopt it as part of their local approval of the new energy code. So that's great strategy, Michael. And I wanted to say that recently we had a discussion with the Sustainability Committee here in the city of Santa Barbara to talk about their sustainability action plan for the city. And the gas company was present to, at first, just hang around and see what was happening. When they realized that the city was going to ramp up and join San Luis Obispo to move zero net carbon as a city goal to 2035, they got very agitated. So we should expect that across the board. They were very present in the discussions, PG&E in San Luis Obispo, when they discussed going zero net carbon for some sectors of their code adoption. And we should just be expecting that across the board because it's going to affect them financially. And the other thing is, I don't know if anybody has an update on getting the TDV to EUI converter worked out with the Building Standards Commission, or if that's just an ongoing effort.
So Paul, I'd just like to second your comment about SoCal Gas, and I've been trying to figure out how to respond. And I think we just want to hear them. And for people that are really concerned about losing their jobs, we don't want to just dismiss that. I think it's going to be a multi-decade transition to get off of gas. And anybody who's working in that industry can retire in that industry if they want to. But it is going to be a big change. And so I think we want to acknowledge that and be respectful of that, but at the same time say we've got to make this transition and we need to plan for a just and fair transition for all people. And somebody's got to make a plan for who's going to pay for all those gas assets that are going to have to be abandoned over the next few decades. And that's probably not us, that's the legislature or something, but it's a big transition that has to be planned for.
I wanted to respond, Paul, to your question about what's happening with the CEC metrics issue. As you know, that's been in the pipeline for over a year, unfortunately. There have been very recent conversations between Nikki. She's leading the charge on this. I think the key tipping point is going to be when we're able to set that follow-up meeting, and we need some experts there that can speak to the importance of this and the simplicity of it. So, and I know that you and Frank and a number of people have been very articulate about why this is so important and why, because the pushback we're getting is they feel like if it's not part of energy compliance, they feel it creates confusion, and clearly it does not, and it's important. But they need to hear it from multiple experts. And so I think until we have that meeting, though, it seems like they've sort of internally, they've not drawn a line in the sand, but they made a preliminary decision. So we're going to really have to push hard. And that's what we're focusing on, is getting that follow-up meeting right now. And there have been, just in the last couple of days, I think Nikki's very close to getting a date. So stay tuned.
I think it's a two-way street on that one, Mike. We should emphasize that it allows people within California to look to projects outside of our state for comparative metrics, but it also, I think once we start operating in a bubble of energy performance data that doesn't have a metric that other people from other states can refer to, it's going to slow down innovation outside of California to use the metrics that we're using. So I think it's going to help us compare for really high performance projects outside, and it'll also help other people see what we're actually doing in terms of our envelope performance. So that's really the goal. Again, like I believe you mentioned, what California does is we'll be able to influence what other states and other countries do, and having that metric as part of our normal benchmarking performance to be able to share with them will help them innovate and do what we're doing, because they won't have the same TDB metrics that we have in California. Thanks.
Thank you, Paul. So here's one question that actually Mike wrote in advance, but I'll give you full credit for it, Mike Malinowski. I think it's a good one. Picture a busy principal of a small firm with just an hour or two a month available. How could they engage in a meaningful way to help advocate for the profession of architecture? I think that's a huge question because there's so many of us. We're all busy. We've got, you know, seems like with the pandemic, it's even busier with Zoom meetings back to back, et cetera, et cetera. So you know, what is, anybody have any thoughts about sort of you know, the most effective way to kind of to be advocates for the profession? I'm a firm believer in the ripple effect. I think we all represent you know, individuals who can create a ripple that might affect other individuals who then might affect other individuals. So any thoughts on that?
Maybe they can commit to a 2030 and become part of the AIA 2030 palette and not focus outside, but focus internally and make their practice more sustainably and change the culture. And then from there, I think that's going to open the gates wide open for them to actually make an impact, outward impact.
That's a great point. Thank you.
Also, I think that we have a class on the 2030 commitment. I think the date's been firmed up now with AIA California. The first introduction class will be on October 8th. So there'll be a message coming out to all you chapters about finding your members who want to sign up for the 2030 commitment. And we're going to have Bill and myself and Stacy White from San Luis Obispo talking about what it's all about, how you do it, how it affects your firm. And we'll be following that up with, I think, monthly classes that are going to be talking about how it's affected people's practices, how to do it, how you can do low-income housing with it, how to read the new DDX and the new rollout for the new tuned-up DDX from some folks from Nationals. So hopefully we can get all the firms across California plugged into this program that is incredible and can really give you a different perspective on looking at the portfolio of work you do every year. So I'm stoked about that happening. And thanks, Bill, for contributing to that.
I was
Sure.
going to offer Bill, this is Rona, that it's certainly important for all architects to have minimal, be minimally articulate and knowledgeable, but educating your clients is a little bit trickier. So the resources to educate the clients, not just the project managers and their executives, but also the men and women that care for and feed the buildings. Where they're voluntary project applications, educating them about the long-term benefits is absolutely critical. So I think that is another outcome of the tremendous materials you've offered.
That's a perfect segue, Rona. We have these quarterly meetings were requested by the local code group that we gathered in May. So this is the first in that series. The next one is Making the Case. So that was the most popular, but it's taking a little bit more research time. And then the following one after that is going to be Local Advocacy, where we focus on how folks can actually be that local advocate. Hopefully by then we'll have the one pager, and I'm sure Scott is willing to have as many people sign on before that point as possible. But those are the topics that we're going to be looking at. And finally, way out next May, we're going to be looking for success stories from all of you, local success stories that we can start to share. We're already seeing San Francisco gathering events from code committees across the area to share those on a broader basis. So that's actually going to become a calendar that's available on AIA California Code in order that everyone can see the available webinars now, especially that are easily shared with people across the state.
Thank you, Sharon. And so this is an opportunity to introduce Sharon Refem, of course, and Heidi Creighton, who have been organizing these roundtables along with AIA California staff. So I feel a little awkward doing so much of the talking. Sharon, did you have any other points to add that might have been missed during the discussion?
No, you're doing a great job. Thanks for doing it.
Okay.
Yeah, thanks, Bill. And Katie just included the link to register for the future roundtables, so that's in the chat box.
Excellent, excellent. Any other thoughts before we? With 4 minutes to go, anyone's got a burning question or a pitch to make about advocacy?
I had one more thought about what we all could do. We were just pursuing a new job, and we were trying to figure out who we were going to partner with our consultants. And one mechanical engineers came up, and I said, well, I'm not sure they're on board with electrification. And when we called them up and told them we were pursuing a new project and we were thinking about putting one on their team, and we were wondering if they were into electrification, they suddenly were all into it. And so, you know, and there's fewer mechanical engineers that do a lot more projects than we do. So I think if we commit our firms to trying to, you know, not use fossil fuels in our buildings and communicate that to our team, I think that's a very powerful thing. And, you know, there are some cases where it's hard and we have to figure out how to do it. And that takes all of our design skills. And so I think those are super valuable things to be working on.
Yeah, and I think I would also add that that I think the kind of being armed with the information. So I think having a 1-page, 2-page kind of you know, list of talking points to talk to your clients about is actually going to be a huge benefit. But I have to say, all the work that Scott and others are doing at the local level has already benefited my practice, because I'm working on a project in Petaluma, and the client said, we're just going to put gas in this building, and we kept saying, no, we're not going to put gas. We're going to make it all electric, right? And they said, no, we got to put gas. Gas is a lot cheaper, blah blah blah. And then Petaluma came in, swooped in at the 11th hour, and solved the debate, because they just passed their all electric ordinance for commercial buildings, and we didn't have to argue about it anymore. So this is why codes are absolutely so important. If we can just keep getting the codes changed and move forward on that, we can spend less time arguing with our clients and more time designing zero energy buildings. So I don't want that to be the last statement. Anybody else have anything to add as we wrap up here?
I was going to add that this is Alice again. Do we have, and maybe it's just buried in an email, a directory to how to reach out to folks? You know, that I see all these names on my screen and wanting to reach out and connect. Do we have a Coat Network directory?
We could put together a directory and share it with the group so that everyone has each other's contact information.
That would be lovely if people are okay with that. Thank you so much. I was going to say one other thing. You made me think, Scott, in your little story, which I loved. Another opportunity that is more immediate, you know, while we push through these long, you know, 3 years in the making code change processes. In our everyday projects, if we reach out when we are teaming, if we look to see, maybe not bring in the you know, the folks that know how to do all electric, right? It's kind of, they get all the work, but look for those minority and small firms, you know, of our sub-consultants that might not be so familiar, but would be more than willing, right, to be mentored, to be trained in this, and take on some of that ourselves in order to help promote small and minority firms, as well as those who might well be, you know, could be advocates and fans of electrification themselves if they just were introduced to it. So I applaud you, Scott, for reaching out to those folks that maybe not so familiar. Same thing goes with associated architects. The more we can self-train our own industry, I mean, you know, I don't know how many thousands of architects we have. We're not all on this screen. We don't all know about, you know, how to build all electric and how to actually decarb existing buildings that we work on. So I just want to expand on that and have people think about that as they're planning their teams for their projects. Thanks.
Thanks, Alice. I appreciate that. And thank you, everyone, for joining us today. Just a reminder that the next COAT Roundtable will be on November 5th, 12 to 1:30 p.m. on making the case, as Sharon mentioned, making the case for climate action. Please don't forget to register on the AIA website, and don't forget to be those ripples that ripple out and inspire others to take action. All right, thanks very much.
Thank you, everybody.
Bye, everyone.